In 1861, the United States stood on the verge of rupture. Several states had already declared they would leave the Union. Militias were organizing. Rail lines and river routes, once instruments of commerce, were becoming arteries of war. At the center of this uncertainty stood Abraham Lincoln. He did not come from an established political dynasty. He was shaped by frontier labor, by self-education, and by a legal career built case by case across the towns of Illinois. He understood the mechanics of ordinary life: land, debt, transport, law. These were not abstractions to him. They were survival, but survival was no longer a local matter. It was national. The country he inherited was divided not only by slavery, but by incompatible visions of sovereignty. Could individual states abandon a federal compact? Or was the Union permanent? Behind the speeches and elections stood something more practical: control of territory, control of industry, control of the Mississippi River and the rail corridors that bound North and West together. Power would be measured in movement and in food. If the Union fractured, trade routes would shatter. Western farms would lose access to global markets. Coastal ports would become contested gates. What began as political disagreement had become a logistical crisis. Lincoln understood this. Preserving the Union meant preserving the arteries that sustained it, yet every action carried risk. Call for troops, and war becomes unavoidable. Delay, and secession hardens into permanence. Speak too cautiously about slavery, and the moral cause weakens. Speak too boldly, and border states might turn away. There was no path without cost, only calculation. In the months ahead, decisions made in Washington would determine whether a continental republic could endure internal rebellion. The presidency itself would expand under pressure. Constitutional boundaries would be tested in real time. By the end, the office would not be the same, nor would the nation. This is not simply the story of a man. It is the story of a system under strain, of institutions pushed to their limits, and of leadership exercised in the narrow space between collapse and survival. The balance he sought would demand everything. Let us begin, and subscribe. When we examine the political journey of Abraham Lincoln, we are not watching the steady ascent of a destined statesman. We are watching a long negotiation between ambition and limitation, between principle and survival, between personal doubt and national expectation. He entered politics not as a national figure, but as a young lawyer in Illinois who understood something essential about power. Power began locally. It moved through roads, canals, banks, and courts. It was built in county meetings and state assemblies. It was earned slowly. His early allegiance was to the Whig Party, a party that believed in internal improvements, economic modernization, and a strong legislative branch. For Lincoln, politics was not yet about slavery. It was about development. Roads connected farms to markets. Railways expanded opportunity. Government could shape prosperity. This was practical politics, and it suited him, but the Whigs were fragile. They lacked the unified identity of their rivals in the Democratic Party, who spoke more clearly to expansion and popular sovereignty. The Whigs depended on compromise across regions. As sectional tension over slavery intensified, compromise became harder to maintain. Lincoln's early congressional term in the 1840s revealed both his ambition and his limits. He criticized the Mexican-American War, questioning the grounds on which it had been justified. It was a bold move for a first-term representative. It did not reward him. He returned to Illinois after a single term. For a time, his political rise appeared stalled. He focused on law. He traveled the judicial circuit, argued cases, built a reputation for clarity and fairness. In court, he refined the discipline that would later define his presidency: careful language, strategic restraint, patience. Politics, however, did not release him. The nation was changing. The question of slavery's expansion into new territories was no longer theoretical. The westward movement of settlers required legal decisions. Would new states permit slavery or prohibit it? Each answer shifted the balance of power in Congress. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 reopened this conflict by allowing territories to decide for themselves. It effectively repealed earlier compromises that had limited slavery's expansion. For many in the North, it felt like a reversal. For Lincoln, it was a turning point. Silence was no longer an option. He was not an abolitionist in the radical sense. He did not initially argue for immediate social equality. His position was narrower and more constitutional. Slavery, he believed, was morally wrong. But more urgently, it must not spread. If confined, he believed, it would eventually weaken and disappear. This was a political calculation and a moral one. Out of the collapse of the Whigs emerged a new coalition, the Republican Party. It united former Whigs, Free Soilers, and anti-slavery Democrats. Its central principle was opposition to the extension of slavery into the territories. Lincoln joined this movement not as its founder, but as one of its most articulate voices in the West. His debates with Stephen A. Douglas during the Illinois Senate race of 1858 transformed him into a national figure. Douglas argued for popular sovereignty. Let each territory decide. Lincoln countered that a nation could not endure permanently half slave and half free. The phrase was precise and provocative. He did not win that Senate race. The Illinois legislature selected Douglas. By traditional standards, Lincoln had failed, yet something had shifted. His arguments circulated beyond Illinois. Newspapers reprinted his speeches. His clarity gave structure to Northern unease. He articulated what many felt but had not framed so directly. Loss, in this case, elevated him. Failure made him visible. By 1860, the political map was fractured. The Democratic Party split along sectional lines. Southern Democrats demanded federal protection for slavery in all territories. Northern Democrats resisted. The division opened space. Lincoln secured the Republican nomination not because he was the most famous candidate, but because he was acceptable to multiple factions. He was seen as firm but not extreme. Western but nationally minded. Principled but pragmatic. It was a coalition choice, not a charismatic one. When he won the presidency, he did so without Southern electoral support. For many in the South, his election signaled permanent political marginalization. Secession followed swiftly here. His rise met immediate resistance. Victory triggered crisis. States began leaving the Union before he even assumed office. Federal property was seized. Conventions declared independence. The issue was no longer slavery's expansion. It was Union itself. Lincoln's inaugural address was measured. He offered reassurance where he could. He promised not to interfere with slavery where it already existed. But he also asserted that secession was legally void. The Union, he argued, was perpetual. That claim would define his presidency. When Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter, the conflict became open war. Lincoln called for volunteers to suppress the rebellion. Border states wavered. Virginia joined the Confederacy. Kentucky and Missouri became contested ground. His political journey now moved from persuasion to command. The stakes expanded beyond elections. War required mobilization on an unprecedented scale. Troops, weapons, rail coordination, naval blockades. Lincoln had little military experience, yet he was now responsible for the largest armed force in American history. To that point, he made mistakes. He appointed generals who hesitated. He tolerated delays longer than many critics wished. His cabinet included rivals who doubted him. Newspapers attacked him relentlessly. The authority, in war, is never absolute. It must be enforced. He suspended habeas corpus in certain regions, allowing the detention of suspected Confederate sympathizers without immediate trial. It was controversial. Critics accused him of overreach. Supporters argued necessity of this tension defined his political balancing act: preserve liberty, preserve union, preserve both. As casualties mounted, public patience thinned. By 1862, the war was bloodier than many had imagined. Early hopes of a swift resolution faded. European powers watched carefully, considering whether to recognize the Confederacy. Lincoln recognized that the conflict required a moral dimension strong enough to deter foreign intervention. If the war remained a struggle merely for union, European monarchies might sympathize with Southern claims of self-determination. If it became a war against slavery, the calculus changed. Public opinion abroad mattered. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued in 1863, declared enslaved people in Confederate-held territory to be free. It did not immediately free all enslaved individuals. It was limited by military reach, yet politically, it transformed the war. It altered its purpose. Lincoln's journey had shifted again. He moved from containing slavery's expansion to attacking its legal foundation. The war became a means of social transformation. This decision carried risk. Border states still loyal to the Union permitted slavery. Some Northern voters opposed emancipation. The Democratic Party framed the war as reckless and destructive. In the 1864 election, Lincoln faced the possibility of defeat. War fatigue was real. Casualty lists were long. Cities bore the strain of taxation and industrial pressure. For a time, even Lincoln believed he might lose. He prepared for that outcome, yet military victories in the late summer of 1864 strengthened his position. The capture of Atlanta signaled momentum. Voters weighed continuity against uncertainty. He was re-elected, but not unchallenged. The final phase of the war moved rapidly. Confederate resources diminished. Rail networks were destroyed. Supply lines collapsed. Surrender became inevitable. When the Confederacy fell in 1865, Lincoln stood at the height of his political power. The Union had survived. Slavery was effectively dismantled, soon to be formally abolished by constitutional amendment. His rise, it seemed, was complete, but victory carried new dilemmas. Reconstruction posed questions as complex as war. How would former Confederate states re-enter the Union? What rights would formerly enslaved people hold? How would loyalty be assessed? Lincoln favored a lenient approach toward the South, seeking rapid reintegration. He believed prolonged punishment would harden resentment. Yet others in Congress demanded stricter measures. The political struggle was shifting again, from battlefield to legislature. He did not live to navigate it fully. In April 1865, days after General Lee's surrender, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. His fall was sudden and irreversible, yet politically, his journey did not end in that theater. The structures he reshaped endured. Federal authority had expanded decisively. The presidency had asserted unprecedented wartime powers. Slavery, as a national institution, was destroyed. His rise was built not on dramatic gestures, but on incremental positioning. He aligned himself with emerging coalitions. He adapted when parties collapsed. He accepted defeat when necessary, and returned stronger. His fall was not electoral. It was violent, but even in death, his influence continued to shape the Reconstruction debates he would not witness. The balance between reconciliation and justice remained unresolved. The Union was preserved, yet unity would require generations to stabilize. Lincoln's political journey was not a simple ascent. It was a sequence of recalculations under mounting pressure. He adjusted without surrendering core principles. He expanded executive power while insisting on constitutional grounding. He moved cautiously on slavery, then decisively when conditions aligned. At each stage, he responded to constraints rather than ignoring them. That discipline defined him. His rise emerged from fragmentation within older parties. His authority solidified under war. His moral legacy crystallized through emancipation. His fall transformed him from politician into symbol, but symbols can obscure reality. The reality was effort. He operated within limits: public opinion, military capability, economic capacity, constitutional debate. He did not control events so much as channel them. His success lay in recognizing when conditions allowed boldness, and when restraint preserved legitimacy. In the end, his political career reshaped the structure of the American state. The federal government emerged stronger. The presidency more central. Citizenship more explicitly defined in relation to freedom. After his death, the nation he had preserved entered a new struggle over equality and memory. The questions he confronted did not vanish, they evolved. His rise and fall, therefore, form not a closed story, but a hinge in a longer national transformation. From frontier legislator to wartime president, from party loyalist to coalition builder, from cautious moderate to emancipator, his path traced the fractures of his era, and those fractures would not heal quickly. The system he fought to preserve survived, but it would be tested again. Final outro: the political journey of Abraham Lincoln did not follow a straight line upward toward triumph. It moved through defeat, hesitation, recalculation, and finally transformation. His rise was built slowly, speech by speech, election by election, within a system already straining under sectional tension. His fall came at the very moment his authority seemed secure. That contrast defines his legacy: power gained, power tested. Life cut short. Lincoln did not begin as a radical reformer. He began as a party man concerned with economic development and national cohesion. But history narrowed his choices. The collapse of old political alignments forced him into new coalitions. Secession forced him into war. War forced him into decisions that expanded executive authority and altered the constitutional landscape. He adapted because he had to and not because it was easy. By the time the conflict ended, the United States had changed permanently. Federal power stood stronger. Slavery had been dismantled as a legal institution. The presidency had proven it could act decisively in crisis. Yet the unity he preserved required reconstruction, reconciliation, and a redefinition of citizenship that would unfold long after his death. His rise reshaped the nation, his fall reshaped its memory. What remains striking is not only what he accomplished, but how he operated within limits. He read public opinion carefully. He moved when timing allowed. He absorbed criticism without abandoning direction. He understood that leadership in a democracy is not command alone, it is persuasion under constraint. After his assassination, he became a symbol of sacrifice and union. But symbols can simplify what was complex. The real story is harder. It is the story of a politician navigating fracture, holding together institutions under extreme strain, and accepting that every decision would carry cost. That is why his journey still matters, because systems still fracture. If you value serious, thoughtful history told with depth and clarity, support the channel. Your engagement allows this work to continue. Subscribe to Dynasty History and join us as we explore the forces, leaders, and turning points that shape the world we inherit.